Good morning, everyone. We're delighted to be welcoming back to Oil and Money Bob Dudley from BP. 5 or 6 years ago, when he last spoke here, he was heading up TNK BP in Russia. And he's now the group chief executive of BP, a position he's had since 2010. We're very much looking forward to what he has to say. He brings great experience, not only with Russia, but also a 20-year career at Amoco before he joined BP with the merger. And so I know you're all eager to hear from him. Without further delay, I'd like to ask you to welcome Bob Dudley. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Tom. Good morning, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to Energy Intelligence and the International New York Times, which I have always called the International Herald Tribune, but it's now the International New York Times, for the invitation to be here this morning. Thank you very much. I see the conference is celebrating 35 years of oil and money. I've just recently completed 35 years in the oil industry myself, having joined with great enthusiasm and a sense of adventure back in 1979. Which you may be aware was a pretty eventful year for oil and gas itself back then. It was the year of the second oil shock following the Iranian Revolution. It was the year when the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan. And for anyone working in the North Sea, believe it or not, there was a referendum that year on Scottish independence to think about. So some things don't change. But the main point is that major change, turbulent and sometimes dramatic change, has been a constant backcloth in our industry's work. The oil business has been dealing with uncertainty since it began. And the difference today is simply in the volume, the speed and the diversity of turbulent events that are occurring. We have conflicts in the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq, Libya, and elsewhere in the aftermath of the so-called Arab Spring. We have the continuing tensions between Ukraine and Russia and various related sanctions. Climate change remains a major risk for the planet, yet one that competes for government attention with more immediate concerns over security and the economy. And economic uncertainty is driving a new wave of volatility in the oil price. Brent crude is trading at around, fell as low as around $83 this week. It soared back up to $86 right before this talk, but down from only $115 only 3 months ago, bucking an unprecedented stretch of around 3.5 years at $100 a barrel. I remind people what 2008 and 9 was like. 2008, the price of oil hit $147 a barrel. By the end of that year and in the spring, it fell to $37 a barrel. By the next year, it was back up to $100. So we're an industry that has to live with enormous volatility. But it's a long list of unknowns for us to talk about and to manage today. However, I'm going to talk about 3 reasons why I believe we should look ahead with confidence. And not just because we all work in an industry that has a track record of rising to challenges. First, new resources. We know demand is going to go up and that there is more energy in the ground to meet it, more than anyone had previously thought. Second, new technology, which is moving us in leaps and bounds in terms of what the industry can achieve in finding and producing hydrocarbons safely and economically. And third, new partnerships, often with old friends, which will allow the industry to develop the energy the world needs, despite the challenges both above and below the ground. And then I'll finish with how I see the industry turning these changes into a new proposition for energy consumers and energy investors. Let me start with new resources and the problem that our industry has to solve, which is summarized on this relatively simple slide. First, the population is growing, and anyone over 50 years old has already seen the global population triple. And it's set to go from today, more than 7 billion people, to around 9 billion by 2035. Second, the global economy is growing. And remember, this is a long-term view, but global GDP has been increasing on average of about 3.5% per year since 1970, and it's expected to continue to do so to 2035. And third, energy consumption continues to grow. And in the last 2 decades, energy demand grew by around 50%. And in the next 2 decades, we expect it to grow about 40%. And while technically that may sound like a slowdown, it won't feel like one, because 40% more energy by 2035 roughly means 1 more United States and 1 more China to the world's growing energy consumption. We're going to need all forms of energy to be able to meet that demand. So what do we need to do to meet that demand at scale? We don't need to panic. There are sufficient resources in the ground. Back in 1980, at the time of the first Oil and Money Conference, the world's proved reserves of oil amounted to about 700 billion barrels. Since that time, to date, we've consumed 200 billion more barrels than we actually knew were in the ground back then. And we have since found about 1 trillion more. So as an industry, we have proved ourselves highly capable of meeting current demand, while at the same time going out and discovering and booking the energy needed to satisfy the phenomenal growth in new demand. History tells a story of new frontiers and new sources of supply opening up all around the world in gas as well as oil. Actually, we forecast energy demand being met by equal shares of oil, gas, and coal, each delivering roughly 27% by 2035. And I think about it as the rule of 27s. It may not be the desired outcome, but it's probably very close to what's going to happen. Renewable energy will go from around 2% today. The fastest growing will be up around 7% in 2035. Last year alone, our company was involved in 7 discoveries with commercial potential in Angola and Egypt, Brazil, India, and the Gulf of Mexico. And yet this quarter, we've announced 3 more discoveries in Brazil, the Gulf of Mexico, and in the North Sea, bringing new projects on. One any day now in the North Sea, which I think is a great way to celebrate 50 years in the North Sea, as the industry has been doing this month. In the next session, you will hear a lot about the potential from unconventional resources. What we know for sure is that unconventionals have turned things upside down in the industry, completely full circle in the United States. Last year, shale-related production increases took the U.S. back up to being a 10 million barrel a day producer after dipping below 7 million barrels a day as recently as 2008. The U.S. saw the world's largest increase in oil production in 2013, and the prediction is for even stronger production growth this year, taking the U.S. to being the world's largest producer of oil for the first time since 1984. The U.S. government has estimated the shale gas could increase the world's total gas reserves by as much as 50%. And then looking at the global picture, summarized on this slide, from our energy outlook, we see over a quarter of the world's gas and more than 1 in every 10 barrels of oil coming from unconventional supplies by 2035. That still leaves the lion's share coming from conventional sources, which means more to come from new plays onshore and offshore, from deeper water, deeper wells, and in time from the Arctic. That brings me to my second point, which is new technology. Given what is happening across the industry, and particularly what I see at BP, I think we may come back to look on this time as a golden age of innovation. By way of illustration, it's not so long ago that we thought a few hundred feet of water was deep water. In 1990, 1,000 feet of water was considered deep water. Now we're drilling water depths of 10,000 feet that go down tens of thousands of feet below that to the reservoirs. The next step is probably to go even deeper, to unprecedented depths, unprecedented temperatures, and unprecedented pressures. And of course, safely managing unprecedented levels of risk, which all of us in this industry do. I'm sure we're going to see incredible innovation in the next few years, pushing back the frontiers of science and engineering in terms of materials that are built, the means we have for remotely monitoring and sensing our activities, and means of ensuring safety. One example of this tool we call a Well Advisor. Slide gives you an idea of the information it provides, and screens that could be called dashboards for drillers. They can be located far away and on the site as well. They collect the data picked up by the sensors and other equipment during the drilling operations. Then they bring it together in real time and in ways that are easy and meaningful to interpret by many people with simple codings of information. Show the health of blowout preventers, other vital equipment in drilling wells. So digital technology is developing what's possible at an extraordinary pace, and it's certainly transforming how we image potential reserves and reservoirs. 3D and 4D seismic were game changers a decade ago. In BP's case, they helped us find fields that were previously hidden under salt canopies, such as Atlantis in the Gulf of Mexico and Thunder Horse. More recently, advanced seismic imaging, enhanced by an ongoing revolution in computing power, has uncovered fields from the Paleogene, deep levels in the Gulf of Mexico, such as fields like Cascada and Tiber and others around the world in Angola and Egypt and Azerbaijan. The computing capacity here is astounding to me. Probably not the world's leader in technology myself, but it is astounding. The word petaflop hasn't really made it into the dictionary yet. But the supercomputer, one that we have in Houston, has 2 of them, and they allow it to perform some 2 billion calculations per second. So in practical means, that means an analysis that would have taken a geologist 4 years to complete in 2004 can now be done in just 1 day. Alongside these innovations in discovery, there's another revolution going on, and that is in recovery. And it's perhaps an even more important one. The fact is, we've reached a point globally where the potential for enhanced recovery from existing and known hydrocarbon resources actually exceeds the potential, I think, from new discoveries, including the Arctic and the ultra-deep water. The IEA talks about the potential to unlock an extra 300 billion barrels from conventional resources, just by recovering more from the ones we know about. Technology is challenging. The typical recovery rate of a reservoir is 30 to 35%. But that's fast becoming part of the history of our industry, and is actually part of the history of what we used to call peak oil. This picture is one of the discovery wells in Prudhoe Bay in Alaska, taken back in 1969. The field is still growing strong after 45 years, and we are now targeting a 62% recovery. Unthinkable back then. That's about 5 billion barrels more than originally projected back in the 1970s, or the equivalent of discovering a whole new supergiant field. We've just signed deals to work with the ADMA OPCO in Abu Dhabi to develop EOR programs that is looking to push the recovery rates beyond 70% from the carbonate reservoirs offshore Abu Dhabi. That work will build on experience with some proprietary EOR technology that we call low-sal, which are going to deploy from day one of production off the Clare Ridge field here in the UK. It should be on stream by 2017. And by building in EOR today at the very beginning of a project, we expect to recover in that case an additional 42 million barrels a day at an extra cost of just $3 a barrel. But behind these recovery percentages is a reminder that our business is about delivering the best value we can for everyone involved in a partnership. From the consumers at one end, of the investors at the other, and the host governments and the various oil companies involved in between. Partnerships going forward need to be deeper and richer than I think they've ever been. This is a picture from the groundbreaking ceremony last month for the Southern Gas Corridor project in Azerbaijan. Presidents, prime ministers, and senior officials from 11 different countries put their signature on this pipe. This is a pipeline that will run from Azerbaijan to Georgia to Turkey to Greece to Albania and eventually into Italy, and then taking gas into the heart of Europe. If we go back a century or so, the first chapter in the history of the oil business was all about international oil companies, or IOCs. Then the second chapter was all about the national oil companies, or the NOCs. And I think we're into the next chapter in which the big stories, as I see it, are all about NOCs and IOCs and respective governments and authorities working in new and very different kinds of partnerships, where you each bring your own distinctive capabilities and resources into something that is mutually beneficial. There's a saying I like, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. In our industry, stamina is more important than speed. Given the scale and the complexity and the cost of some of the biggest projects being undertaken in the world, no one company or country can do them all alone. And there is a need for strong partnerships to make them happen. Now, on the same day as that signing of the pipe in Baku, we were also celebrating a 20-year anniversary of what was called at the time the contract of the century, which was the deal to develop the giant Azeri-Chirag-Guneshli deepwater oil fields in the Caspian Sea, build the BTC pipeline from Baku to Ceyhan in Turkey, which you see here taking shape back in 2003, or some of you have seen it in a James Bond movie, which I think they rode down it somehow. That was a contract with 11 international companies joined together with SOCAR, the Azeri National Oil Company, to transform not just the oil industry in Azerbaijan, but the country of Azerbaijan, which was facing a deep recession, actually civil war back in 1994. Since then, GDP has increased 16 times to 75 billion, and the non-oil sector of the economy has developed tenfold, from just under $4 billion to nearly $40 billion last year. The local business infrastructure has improved out of all recognition, and thousands of jobs have been created. Without a doubt, investment has invigorated the oil and gas sector, and the oil and gas sector has invigorated the country. And Azerbaijan is turning into a major strategic supplier of both oil and gas to the world. I'd like to mention one more example, one that means a lot to BP, but back in 2009, the Rumaila Operating Organization was formed with PetroChina and BP and SOMO, which is the Iraq State Oil Marketing Organization. It's a partnership that is breathing new life back into one of the world's great oil fields and providing very important funds for a nation pulling itself together. It brings PetroChina's access to drilling, manufacturing, and engineering resources, SOMO's workforce of some 5,000 people eager for work and experience in the field, and our experience in operating giant fields. Today, it's probably the second largest producing field in the world at around 1.4 million barrels a day. Since the time that partnership was formed in 2009, 100 new wells generated, business for over 200 Iraqi companies, created about 20,000 new jobs in the supply chain, raised the skills of thousands of workers, and delivering around 500,000 hours of training last year alone. Increased production by 40%, from just under 1 million barrels to 1.4. Iraq's total daily oil output peaked at 3.5 million barrels a day in 1979, and 35 years later, it looks like it just might be getting back close to that figure again. From what we can learn about our seismic testing and what we now know about EOR, we believe Rumaila now holds a resource of nearly 20 billion barrels of recoverable oil. Elsewhere in the world, the prospect of such partnerships is just appearing on the horizon. I think you'll be talking more about this tomorrow, but in Mexico, for example, a path is being prepared for new types of investment and new types of partnerships that are going to offer great opportunities in the country and for investors from outside. The past 18 months has seen unprecedented changes in Mexico, especially the energy reforms that are in the process of being implemented. They are the most far-reaching reforms in the industry for many decades. Without a doubt, Mexico has carried out a major transformation of its legal framework to enable a transformation of its energy sector. And that transformation opens up possibilities for a variety of contracts across the entire energy value chain. And I hope we'll all be seeing Emilio Lozoya tonight and hearing his comments tomorrow. Along with President Nieto, Emilio has been instrumental in shaping this new era for energy in one of the world's historic energy-producing nations. It's an era that will bring new technology and new techniques to bear on both new and old resources. And there will be opportunities to show that the latest seismic can discover, both onshore and out in the deep waters of the Gulf of Mexico, including the subsalt provinces. There will be opportunities to show what EOR can do to maximize recovery from mature fields, and the chance to show how drilling techniques can unlock unconventional resources, such as oil from the tight rocks of Chicontepec and the gas and liquids from Mexico's many promising shale horizons. The partnerships that unfold may be new, but they will mostly be with old friends. So we congratulate Mexico and look forward to the new post-reform era. So why should new resources and technology partnerships matter so much? I think they matter to our industry because they enable our industry to create a better proposition, a safer, more efficient, more cost-effective proposition. It's clear that the industry's offer is under pressure, a pressure that goes up a notch with every dollar that comes off a barrel of oil. And energy faces tough competition for investment capital from the telecoms, pharmaceuticals, IT, technology, and other sectors. This is particularly important for the international oil companies like BP. We've invested a lot of money since the big oil mergers of the 1990s, and we continue to do so, given the cost and the lifespan of the big energy projects. The IEA estimates an annual spend of $1 trillion across the industry, mostly in the upstream, for the next 20 years. Meanwhile, the analysts are looking at the figures and say the majority of projects in history, they've all been over budget and come in late in schedule. You generate lots of cash, you overspend it, you don't actually return it to your investors like you should. According to E&Y, 2 out of every 3 current projects are facing cost overruns, and 3 out of 4 are behind schedule. That's based on 365 projects they looked at over $1 billion. So it's not surprising then that the jury is still out on the investment community on the industry's ability to generate sufficient returns. The multiples of our industry are low. They want to see strict capital discipline. They want us to make the right calls and stick to our budgets. And they want us to execute with great efficiency. And of course, with safety as a top priority. So investors are expecting to see that we all have discipline, an approach that focuses on safe, disciplined, and reliable operations with much attention on operating and generating cash flow as it does on the capital investment care. That's the core of our strategy, and for all of us in the industry, it provides a stable platform in which to operate securely in an increasingly uncertain landscape. So we have a strategy, we have a means to deliver it. We're a much more focused company than we were 5 years ago. I see an industry increasingly alert for the need for greater financial discipline. I see an industry focusing more and more on value. I see great potential of technology. Our own internal view is that future imaging, drilling, and digital technologies could actually reduce today's underlying costs of supply by between 20 and 40%. And above all, I see new partnerships forming around the world, new resources opening up, and I see technology developing at an ever increasing pace. So I do remain optimistic despite all the challenges today. While the disruptions and the uncertainties we face today are only likely to get bigger, I have no doubt that our industry has the right approach, has the necessary capability, and the real desire to keep meeting these challenges for the world. We have proved we can do it in the past. We will keep on doing it in the future. Thank you, Tom.
Well, we have a little bit of time for some questions here, and I wanted to start out with one of your main themes today about partnership. And you spoke very forcefully about the need for partnership, and one of BP's important partnerships is in Russia with Rosneft. And the question really is that we've had this sort of stark change in the political environment between the West and Russia, which has also involved sanctions on energy. How is BP positioned? I mean, you've got almost 20% stake in Rosneft and about 30% of your production from that. What does this future look like for BP? And the industry, I guess, too.
So, like you said, we had a big business, TNKBP, and sold that business and ended up taking some of the proceeds of that and now own just under 20% of Rosneft. We have very few people, projects, and assets. It's an ownership in Rosneft. I'm on the board of Rosneft, remain active participating with that. So the impact for us is not direct. And we have good relationships in Rosneft, good relationships in Russia. The sanctions will no doubt put pressure in Russia. I think the lower oil price will be more effective in terms of creating stress than the sanctions themselves. Sanctions are fairly targeted in terms of their definitions around working in the Arctic and certain kinds of shales. I am a big believer that commerce does create bridges between countries and societies, and over time can actually help moderate and bring understanding between groups. I also know that our oil and gas industry is one where we have to think out 20, 30, 40 years. Russia today is the largest oil and gas producer on the planet. We're a long-term investor there. I am confident over time that this will remain a good investment for us. And we'll not do anything ever to work our way around or try to avoid sanctions. We'll be very careful about that. But for me, certain individuals I work with have been sanctioned, but I have no intention of working with them on their personal business, so it doesn't actually change my involvement in interaction. Mm-hmm. And I think the industry, Russia has great potential in its oil and gas development, and it's just going to take a little time here. And I have to say, I have watched events unfold in Ukraine since last September, October last year. It's been like watching a slow wreck in terms of all sides, to me, taking steps and making statements to escalate something up to a point we are today where no one intended it to be. And so we just have to hope that cooler heads prevail going forward.
Okay, thanks. In terms of the oil price, and we've seen a big decline the last few months, 25% or so, and talk of this, kind of lower price level persisting for a while. How is BP positioned? How is the industry positioned to deal with this?
I think you have a spectrum in the industry. You have highly leveraged companies. We'll have to navigate here very, very carefully. In our case, we have positioned the company to weather certain shocks because of the accident in the Gulf of Mexico. We sold more than $42 billion of assets over the last few years. I would rather have done that then than try to be doing that today, actually, with lower price. And we have been making our investment decisions on an $80 price all through this period. So I feel comfortable with the investment decisions we've made. And I think we could see the price come down for a extended period of time here. I don't think that's all bad, by the way, for the world. I think a lower oil price will benefit some of the economies which actually create the engines of growth that is also required for prosperity and energy demand down the road. So I'm not one, I can see the good and the bad sides of this. I also think there are unintended consequences that may come in certain countries with a lower oil price where the shock hits. And those are the ones I would be most concerned about. I think sanctions like this would be difficult. Russia, Iran, Venezuela are just three that come to mind, and there's many others.
Okay, well, we have a minute or two left here. Are there some questions here? And anybody question in the back here? Can you just identify your affiliation and your name?
My name is Amir Paivar from BBC World Service. I have two questions. One is, this morning we heard from OPEC Secretary General that tight oil is doomed to decline by 2030. I want to know whether you share that view. Second question is about the gas field in North Sea you share with Iran's NIOC. It started production a couple of weeks ago. Was that a natural end to negotiations which were going on and happen to be now? Or is it a gesture to Iran on the eve of a nuclear deal, however elusive it may be?
I hadn't thought about that last point. Well, I think as we've learned, it was only 2008 and 9 people thought the shale gas revolution in the U.S. wasn't going to last, and some people actually wasn't even sure it was real, and then clearly it has been real and unlocked lots of resources. The shale oil is definitely there, and it's definitely producing, and there are good rates of oil production increasing at very economic rates, certainly at 100. But to say it's doomed by 2030, I'm not sure. So shale oils have kind of come out of the United States. There's other countries around the world where there is shale oil as well. They're not further developed. And countries have to have certain land structures and ownership structures to make that work. But I think Algeria has potential. I think China, Russia also have great potential. So I would be cautious about saying it's doomed. Because the cost curves have also come down. But it will create stresses with this rapid drop in price for sure. The United States probably has the most elastic market in the oil field in the world. So when the price signals come, the rigs can be laid down very quickly. And so let's see what happens during this price volatility. But the oil will remain there. And for those of you who may not be aware, we have a field called Rum in the North Sea. It's spelled R-H-U-M, Scottish name, where BP and Iran invested in that in 1979. So this is really an old partnership. And I think it was 2011 when sanctions were put in place, we immediately shut in the field. That field provided 3% of the gas to the United Kingdom. And over the last 3 years, it has been the UK government working with the American government to create the right conditions for us to form structures that are acceptable to the US on the sanctions, which is why that field has come back on. And I don't think it's a gesture or anything. This has just been a very long, complicated set of discussions with both governments, 3 governments. I'm glad it's back on, though.
Well, good. I'm sorry. With that, folks, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. The time is up. But I'd like you to join me in thanking Bob with a round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Really appreciate it.